Hello and welcome to the Upon Further Review podcast brought to you by Field Street Baptist Church. On this podcast, your host Cody Kitchen sits across the table from Dr. John Hall as he reviews his Sunday sermon from the week before.
Happy Reformation Day for those that care.
Yeah.
Or for those that really celebrate Halloween. Happy Halloween.
I care.
I care too.
I don't care for Happy Halloween.
No, me neither. But
it's free candy day as far as I'm concerned.
There you go. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. Well.
So we live?
Yeah, we're live.
I need to give a shout out to our favorite fan, or
Listener.
a fan of the program. One of our favorite fans,
Yes.
Tanner.
Tanner.
And he instructed me in his text message today to say So there you go, Tanner. Say
Satan.
Thanks for listening, Tanner.
Yeah, we love you, Tanner. And all of our listeners, we love you. And welcome to the Upon Further Review podcast, where we discuss the sermon, John's sermon from the Sunday before. And as always, I'm your host, Cody Kitchen, and joined with me is the one and only Dr. John Hall.
Greetings.
It's my favorite thing to say.
Right. Gee.
Well, we are going to talk about John's sermon from Sunday, which the title was The Balance of Blessing and Burden, from 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 5 through 10. Almost there.
Yes.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yes.
Well, what are some things that came to mind as you prepared this sermon?
We're almost there. That's exactly what came to mind. I looked at the remaining text and I'm like, I can condense this into 2 sermons. So I finished the last sermon in 2 Corinthians this week. I'll preach it on December 3rd. Man, we are almost there.
Man, what a perfect timing to finish. And then the new year,
I'll start something new in January.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what came to my mind. And then this whole idea, the thorn in the flesh, I thought, wow, if of all the texts in 2 Corinthians that most people would have some familiarity with,
Right.
it would be this text.
Yeah, it's a great text.
It is.
Yeah. And you started out with the text, talking about that very thing, is how it's familiar to most readers. And, you know, what did prompt Paul to write these words? And I love that you use the context of the sermon from the week before, of verses 1 through 4 specifically, of the revelation from the Lord, and how that tied into now coming into the text that you used a quote from Warren Wiersbe where he says, if we have only blessings, we have become proud. So he permits us to have burdens as well. And so transitioning in kind of the context of what was happening 1 through 4 into the text starting in verse 5. And you gave us 5 ideas from the text. And I'm going to combine the first 3, which was the imminence of the thorn, the intent of the thorn, and the identity of the thorn, versus looking at verse 7. And you talked about, you know, you gave us the definition of imminence. What is imminence? You talked about how God he permitted this messenger of Satan to torment Paul. And then you talked about also the intent of the thorn. What was the intent? Why did he have the thorn? You talked about the tense of the verb indicates that the pain and difficulty is either constant or recurring. And I love that you transitioned into the third idea where you said, you made sure to say the thorn was painful, but it was purposeful, which then led to the identity of the thorn, and where you just kind of basically said we don't fully know what it is. There's many different ideas out there, but the point of it was it was some sort of a physical suffering, and that whatever it was, we know that it was a beneficial. And the lesson, I guess, that you said, the lesson for each of us is that we have to grapple with the reality that human weakness and divine grace go hand in hand. And we receive blessing and burden from the sovereign hand of God. What a powerful statement. And I think one that has continued to stick with me of thinking of that. In these 3 ideas, really, we kind of see these concepts that don't fully make sense to us, our human minds, of who God is, that he uses these things and for his good, his purposes. And so my question is what can we do to, quote unquote, identify the thorns of our flesh to make sure we respond in a godly way?
I think that the thorn is going to be different from one person to another. It's probably person specific. And I think the approach in handling it would be similar to Paul's approach, to ask the Lord to remove it and then be willing to accept with his help whatever the response from him is. It's interesting to me that in that text, Paul outlines the Lord said essentially, no, my grace is sufficient for you. So he uses the language, I pleaded with the Lord to remove it. And that word pleaded, to me, has a connotation of I begged, I sought the Lord's deliverance from this thorn. And the Lord said, no, because my grace will be sufficient to see you through the aggravation that this thorn brings to your life and ministry. And so I'd hope, you'd have to identify it for yourself. I can't identify what yours is no more than you can identify what mine is. But I hope that our approach to dealing with the thorn would be similar to how Paul dealt with his, to ask for the Lord's grace. And then what gets me most about Paul's response was the yielding, the gracious, almost joy-filled submission, and the realization that he came to that in my weakness, the strength of Christ will be on display. Wow. I mean, I'm not there yet. And Paul was an otherworldly kind of Christian.
Right.
But it must have been something for Paul to go, I'm begging the Lord to remove this. And the Lord has said no.
Yeah, for me, going on right along that, going into that fourth idea, you talked about what you just said about how we see that Paul says he'll boast about his weaknesses so the power of Christ may dwell in him. And I think about everything that Paul just went through in 2 Corinthians and how he talks about, I'm going to boast so that you can understand what the Lord's doing. And now here in this context, he's saying, look, now I'm going to be talking about my weaknesses. And to me, you see this transition in Paul where he's saying, like, I had to go there because y'all made me go there. But I'm going back to where I'm as real as I am then, I'm real now that I have this weakness, but Christ is still going to use me. He's still powerful in that same. And it made me think of when you talked about on Sunday of when Jesus comes onto the scene, John says, may I decrease so that you can increase. And it's that mentality that I think through the Spirit, through both of those men, where, I mean, only that kind of thinking can be done through the Spirit. And it just, in a way, it made me kind of think back to the story that we see with John is, man, they had a trust in the Lord that was, as you said, otherworldly, where they truly relied. Can I have the faith like that?
Right.
And for me, that's been the encouragement throughout 2 Corinthians. But now as we come here, I see it, the geniusness of Paul, where he's relied so much on the Spirit, where he's had to boast in the sense of, I'm boasting because you've made me in this way, what the Lord has done through me. But now I'm boasting about my weakness, about how good God is in my life. And,
sure.
I don't know. It's just for me, it's been a really good contrast to see how through the high and through the low, Paul saying, this is your life, Lord. Use me as an example.
Yeah, it's good.
Which with that, it's a good transition into your fourth idea, which was the intercession of the thorn. And you talked about that, again, God permitted this thorn. It was obviously meant to keep Paul balanced in some way. And as you've already stated, he pleaded with the Lord that it be delivered and that Paul longed for it to be free from these assaults. And I love that you added that Paul's prayer didn't fall on deaf ears. The Lord heard his prayers and heard his compassionate heart. But you also said, quote, be certain of this, the prayer of God's people are never unheard. Never. Yet every believer is compelled to learn the lesson that sometimes God's answer is simply no. What a great reminder for all of us. A reminder I definitely needed to hear. And, you talked about again that we see that the will of God is revealed and that Paul submits, as we just talked about. And you said this, and I think it's important to restate again. You said, quote, "Friend, whatever it is which plagues you, the greater your weakness, the more obvious is the power of God's all-sufficient grace." That's a powerful statement, and so true. One that should go on a billboard. My question for that is, have you ever had anything like a thorn in your life that you felt was used by the Lord in some way?
The answer to that question is a resounding yes. And we don't know the nature of the thorn for Paul, and I laid that out clearly in the sermon. There's a lot of speculation, a lot of conjecture about, was it a person? Was it a demonized person? Was it a physical malady? I lean in the direction it was something physical, but that doesn't make me right. There are a lot of people that they're just all over the place. So you can't be dogmatic. And then I followed up in the message that for reasons only the Lord knows, he has kept that to himself and basically says it's really none of y'all's business. So it must be better for the church to not know. My thorn in the flesh, between the ages of 18 and 36, I kid you not, I had a wound, a physical wound that would not heal. I had 3 surgeries on it. 3 different surgeons operated on this wound to try to promote healing. And it wasn't until I sought in desperation really, I went to see a plastic surgeon who felt like he had a good treatment plan for it. And it was a very painful process. And man, I had that for 18 years. And I can't even tell you how many times I asked the Lord to heal it. And I don't know really what the lesson was necessarily, except I think it did give me a measure of empathy for people who have to deal with some physical things that don't resolve quickly. That's not to say I'm Mr. Compassion. I'm not saying that. But it did give me an understanding for people who have to deal with physical maladies that take a lot of time to heal. And it wasn't until the plastic surgeon, he actually cut muscles and moved muscles around to provide blood supply to this wound. And it was really the fresh blood supply that helped promote healing in this wound. And then we moved to Denver, and by the grace of God, I found a surgeon there that could help follow up what the surgeon in Abilene had done. And he was a great man. I enjoyed my friendship with this doctor. But he got me to the finish line, and by the grace of God, it's remained healed. But man, what I endured, a number of shots and deadening and stitches and surgical procedures and hospital stays, and just the discomfort of the whole thing was rather miserable. But didn't really affect my manner of life too much, except if I hit it or, if it got inflamed or, I didn't slow down much in terms of, I did what I wanted to do.
Sure.
But I was always reminded it was with me.
Wow.
Yeah, and my poor wife, having to deal with it too. But I praise God, in the process of praying about it and how he would lead me to really this plastic surgeon in Abilene who really took the time to evaluate the wound and how he could help fix it. I really appreciated him. Ironically, he was a polo player and was in a terrible car accident. This was years ago. And as a result of that car accident, he became a paraplegic. Wow. Here's this man with all these skills and no ability to use them anymore. Anyway, I just saw the hand of God years later in his providence and how he led me to, one doctor to another, and then finally the doctor in Denver that was just really competent and knew what he was doing. And he put me through the ringer, but he got me to the finish line. So I thank God for that. But yeah, that was a thorn in the flesh, almost literally.
Wow.
Miserable. Yeah.
Sounds like it. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I'm sure the audience is like, all 20 of them, like, oh, gross. But
doubt it.
A little too personal.
Well, the fifth idea going into your last idea was man, you stuck with the eyes. You did such a good job.
Man, and I was struggling on that last one.
The irreducible minimum of the thorn.
You'll never see that again in a sermon. I promise you that.
And you talked about in verse 10 specifically that God's grace transformed Paul, that his perspective changed. And Paul says that he will delight in his weakness, his insult, his distresses, persecution, and difficulties. And you talked about, quote, our problems, our difficulties, our sufferings, our burdens, our opportunities for God to work through us and in us. And you really talked about that it's not that we are supposed to enjoy our burdens, but it's more that our burdens and our problems demonstrate God's power in our lives and how turning these things to glorify God. And so my question is, how can we learn from Paul's perseverance with the thorn?
I think, and it takes a while to learn it. I don't think we learn it in our infancy of walking with Jesus, but I think we are reminded through Paul's experience with a thorn of God's grace and faithfulness. And I don't know that we appreciate that like we should, or we grow to early in our walk with Jesus, especially when we kind of have that mentality of, I can fix most things myself. And then we come to the end of ourselves and figure out, I can't really do that. And we see the faithful hand of God. So like when I look at Paul's life and whatever that thorn was and the response that the Lord gave him, my grace will be sufficient. I've thought and looked back on my own life at where I wish God would have responded in a different way to like remove me out of a situation or whatever. And instead of the removal of the thorn or the removal of the situation, he basically said, no, I'm going to be with you through this. I'm not going to get you out of it, but I will get you through it. And out of that, your faith muscle and the grace muscle and those muscles that you learn to flex in those seasons become stronger. And then you have the beauty and benefit of looking back on the history of your life and seeing these spiritual markers where you see the profound faithfulness of God. And so I think God really does know what he's doing with those thorns, even though I don't always see it in the moment. So the faithfulness of God, I have clung to that in the last several years, that God is faithful. I love that about him.
Amen.
Man, so many people bail on you.
Yeah.
But not God. And I think if you're faithful to him, he's going to be faithful to you. And even when you're faithless, he's still going to be faithful to you. His faithfulness to me isn't contingent upon my faithfulness to him. He's going to be faithful to me no matter what. I'm very appreciative of that.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I need to go out and just, rebel against him in a crazy, foolish way, but he's going to see us through. And that's applicable to parenting, to managing your money, to walking a righteous life, your work. It's application everywhere.
Yeah, that's good. It's really good. Well, usually at this time, we go into our last words before we go into our That Stupid segment. But I'm going to do something a little different, and I'm going to have the last words.
Go for it.
Because today is the last day in October. So I'm going to do everything I can to continue to lift up this Pastor Appreciation.
Gosh.
No, but I'm just going to reiterate again, as we talked about Sunday. I want you to know how much I appreciate you personally.
Thank you.
But also how much I appreciate this podcast, and that we do this podcast not because we have enough all the time to do it, but because we truly, at least my heart in creating it, and I know your heart for it has been, we truly want what is spoken on Sunday to reach the heart of the listeners and to go a little deeper. And so I appreciate the time that you put into it.
You're welcome.
The answering the questions, even if they're softball questions, that you really do. You do care, and you want God's word and truth. And so, again, just one more aspect I appreciate.
Well, thank you.
I know that our listeners appreciate it, because at least I've heard them say that. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Grateful for the 25 people that listen.
Hey, one day
God bless them, man.
One day it'll be 1,000.
It will be.
I believe that.
Nobody believes that, but it will be.
I believe it.
I think at some time God is going to give us a better, a wider audience. Maybe not a better audience, but a wider one.
Yeah, I hope so.
Why not when we're putting out truth?
Yeah, amen. I hope so.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good segment or a good transition into our That's Stupid segment.
Yes, I think this is bonus material.
That's right.
So we're going to hit a lot of topics quickly. So That's Stupid number one, kind of a silly one, is people who run their sprinklers during a rainstorm.
That's stupid.
That's stupid.
Yep.
Number two, poor President Biden seemed to really created a real controversy by his comment that
You can't make this stuff up.
Trump supporters are garbage. You can't make this stuff up. That's exactly right.
That's stupid.
That is stupid.
But the response is better.
The responses have been just off the chart. People are wound up. And then just politics in general right now is stupid. I can't wait for Tuesday night to get here and to come and go.
That's stupid.
And then, of course, we have to comment on all things related to the Cowboys. Yeah.
We thought you were going to get
Everything
away.
going on with the Cowboys right now has that feel of, man, this is stupid.
Even the fans believe that.
Even the fans are fed up.
Yeah.
You can't pay two guys the money you're paying them and expect to field the rest of the team. It's just not going to work. I mean, even I know that you're just not going to be able to do it.
Yeah, I can't believe I'm about to say what I'm about to say, but in a way, I do feel for the Cowboys fans. You know, because I understand why they say they think they're going to go to the Super Bowl every year. It's because on paper you should.
Well, it's like the typical Cowboy fan. I heard somebody say the other day, you know what their annual mantra is? Well, there's always next year. So I think everything related to that organization just has that sense of, man, this is all stupid. I mean, when Troy Aikman comes out and says that the current wide receivers of the Cowboys aren't running their routes precisely and with they're not putting the work in. Ouch.
Yeah.
And it's not like, he went through Super Bowls with that team. So
Yeah.
he's kind of a voice that, I'm sure carries more weight than just the two of us. But,
Part of the problem is the NFL, and it's not necessarily just the Cowboys, but the NFL has created their own culture and laying in their own bed in the sense of these receivers, quarterbacks, these high-profile people think that they can just go wherever they want. All they have to do is hold out.
yeah,
And so there's a part of it
cut
where
loose.
these receivers, I won't name them, but they think, oh, I'm not going to do well here. Someone will pick me up.
And someone does.
Yeah.
Okay, another thing that's stupid, like off the chart stupid, is now you can bet on the presidential election.
That is so stupid.
Why would anybody do that?
People are doing it in record numbers.
They are. It's like, they're betting the farm on one candidate's victory over the other candidate. Oh, man, that is stupid. The things that you can now bet on in our culture is complete foolishness.
It is foolish.
It's everything, all that financial counsel that Solomon gives in the book of Proverbs is in complete violation by so many in the culture today that they're just being foolish about their money.
Whoever created that, he's getting banking.
No, you know it.
Or she.
Yeah.
But
So, there's a lot of stupid stuff going on in
Yes,
the world
there
today.
is.
But, man, may the Lord help us.
May the Lord help us is right.
Yeah. need help.
May we all continue to be praying. God's will be done, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, as always, we're so thankful that you listen to the podcast. Remember to tell a friend, share it with a friend. And as always, remember, make Christ known by what you say and how you live. Have a great week.
Yep.
Thank you all for listening, and be sure to subscribe to Upon Further Review so you never miss an episode. If you have any questions, please be sure to reach out to us at info@fieldstreet.com. Thanks for tuning in.